major developments in the business world because of the results that have trickled in. We've seen a real surprise when it comes to how the results are quite not just the opposite, but quite different from what the exit polls showed. But how is it going to impact India-US ties, the markets, the economy? I'm being joined by none other than Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of USISPF, a very strong India hand, knows the inside out of India-US relations, particularly the economic side of it. Mukesh, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. It seems like all the exit polls almost got the results wrong, almost all of them, barring maybe just a few or one or two. What was your reading? How did you wake up to this news of maybe a very different government formation? Maybe the same government, but a very different way in which it would be looking, it would be comprised of, and the pulls and push and then the power factors could change.
Geeta, good to be talking to you. When you look at the election result, you have a Prime Minister's party, BJP, not getting absolute majority, but I think they will still form a coalition government and come back. The question is the impact or the interest of the international investors in India. I think that does not deplete at all because you have to look at it from a broader perspective. One is that geopolitically, India is in a very strong position vis-a-vis China. And it's an economy which is growing substantially from a $4 trillion to a $5 trillion by 2027, and then continue to grow. So that attracts a lot of companies to come into India and be able to gain the market share of the growing economy. Two, basically from a China perspective, US companies are looking at de-risking their supply chain. So that process continues. I think it's important to understand that regardless of who comes in power in India, India will keep on playing a very critical role, both from a market opportunity perspective and also from a geopolitical perspective. So I don't think there's any diminish of interest. I think more important is going to be critical is that the sense of reform continues, sense of stability continues, sense of transparency continues. And I think and that from regardless of who comes in and drive the agenda, those few items which I mentioned will continue because India is going to play a critical role, a pivotal role, and that process continues.
Well, good to know that because it is very important, not just for the US, but also for India both countries at a very critical stage. There are wars, conflicts that are underway. Economy across the world is facing a lot of challenges. So good to know that there could be continuum between India and US. Also, the fact that US administration has, and at least the community, the diaspora has also engaged the opposition in the recent past. Having said that, Mukesh, when you woke up and you were looking at the numbers, did you for once think that this could very well be the result in India, where Modi was seeking a strong a third term and looked quite strong?
No, obviously, I think after the Ram Mandir, you had a very strong Modi wave, and everybody expected that the numbers will be much higher. We believe that there was a sense of comfort and complacency in BJP. A lot of people didn't turn out to vote because they felt that the prime minister was going to win anyhow. So I think, but that's democracy. You have to adopt and adjust to the changes of the people. But more important is critical to understand that, and that's where US has to learn, changes that happens in Indian democracy are accepted and people move on. And I think from our perspective, when you look at the strength of Indian democracy is that people vote is critical, people's power is critical. And when you have a coalition government coming in, you will see a much more centrist approach to domestic agenda. The reform will continue, but we're not sure the critical reforms such as agriculture, land will move in the right direction. But overall, the sentiment on India in every aspect is very strong, very positive, and then momentum will move on.
Well, we saw the markets really soar to an all-time high yesterday and then crash once the results started coming in and firming up. Clearly, the markets corrected themselves. How do you look at how this result could have an impact on an immediate, when we talk about the immediate future on the markets and the business environment?
So we don't see much of an impact. You have to understand, markets tend to have a knee-jerk reaction, and they correct with time itself. You have to look at from a large long-term investment in India. That sentiment does not change. That sentiment stays very, very strong. Because you have to understand, the US companies are looking at India not only just as a market, but also a competitive tool for them to compete globally. For example, we have almost 1,600 global capability centers now in India. The largest numbers are by the US companies itself. And they are able to do almost $122 billion in exports on technology, on services. So I think that does not diminishes the importance of India. So, and also because the reliance of US companies, both on R&D, try to be competitive, continues to grow. So we will see that momentum absolutely not changing at all. Yes, market will shift because sentiment changes, but overall, long term, the boardroom discussion here is that India is pivotal, India is critical, and they'll keep on investing in every aspect in India itself.
Okay, the strategic aspect now. We saw the Quad, we saw strengthening of the Quad. We've seen a lot of other blocks, whether it's economic or otherwise, where the countries have come together and have increased strength when it comes to strategic cooperation. Would you see any impact there, or are you looking at an India where while there is diverse opinion, while there's divergence of opinion, that the opposition and the current dispensation would certainly come together when it comes to national security and strategic aspects, particularly the Quad, which in fact had started during the UPA government?
So we see no impact, Geeta, on the Quad itself, because you have to understand, as time goes by, China gets much more assertive, much more aggressive. And the stress point between US and China is getting worse in every aspect. You're seeing US stopping a lot of technologies moving to China. US companies are looking at de-risking their supply chain from China. And China has not reduced its borders forces from the Indian side. So those tension continues. So India has no choice. And US has no choice but to come together with India, Japan, and Australia and drive the Quad agenda. But I think you have to understand, Quad agenda is now moving beyond defense partnership.
Yeah.
Now it's moving into economic security. You're looking at Quad driving secure supply chain of critical minerals, critical technology itself. So I think regardless of whoever comes in, the national security is going to be critical for that government, and the Quad plays a pivotal role supporting India's national interests. So I don't think there's any way, any diminished interest or partnership on Quad side.
All right, Mukesh, before I let you go, my final question. This is the biggest democratic process that we've seen, the biggest democratic exercise. In that, we've seen how the countries come together, voted those who were in power as also those who were in the opposition, making a very strong opposition. Your reading on what this means for India, within India, and for India as to how it represents itself outside of India?
Well, you have to give credit to people of India, to the voters. They're smart, astute voters. They are looking at what's good for the country, what's good for them itself. And they're not swayed by much of social media or any other kind of media. They are basically keeping their interests in mind when they go vote locally itself. And when you have 640 million people voting, which is a largest block ever in the history of humankind, what we're seeing is that the democracy is working. And I think the rest of the world has to learn from India as to how do you basically conduct election, how do you basically transit power, how do you basically manage the opposition. So I think it's the beauty of the whole process is that India can teach the world how to manage democracy here.
Mukesh, Aghi, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global.
Thank you, Geeta.